Imagine opening a book that, at first glance, seems to tell a simple story. But as you read, you realize that each word, each symbol, carries a hidden meaning. A message that seems intended only for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. The Gospel of John is exactly that kind of book. Unlike the other Gospels, it doesn't just narrate events, but clothes them in deep symbolism. It's an invitation to a mystical journey, where each metaphor reveals a layer of veiled knowledge. But what is the purpose of this enigmatic construction? And more importantly, could there be a secret message hidden within John's words? To answer this question, we need to understand a fundamental concept: the archetypes. In the spiritual and psychological tradition, archetypes are universal patterns that inhabit human consciousness. They are images, symbols, and narratives that repeat throughout history, appearing in myths, religions, and even in dreams. They are not just abstract ideas, but they shape the way we perceive the world. The Gospel of John is a tapestry woven with these archetypes, creating a narrative that not only informs but transforms. It does not just describe events, but uses figures and symbols to communicate deeper truths. Unlike the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which emphasize the chronology of Jesus' life, John takes a different path. He writes with a philosophical, almost poetic intent, carefully choosing his words to create an impact that goes beyond the surface. His gospel begins with a bold and deeply enigmatic statement. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What does this statement truly mean? Is it just a play on words, or is there a hidden mystery behind it? John presents Jesus not just as a teacher or prophet, but as the Logos, the creative principle of the universe. This idea has deep connections with ancient philosophical and spiritual traditions. The concept of Logos already existed in Greek thought, where it was seen as the divine reason that organizes the cosmos. In Judaism, it aligns with the divine wisdom present in creation. John then unites these streams of thought and presents Christ as the manifestation of this cosmic principle, a bridge between the human and the divine. This is just the first of many hidden archetypes in the Gospel. Another powerful symbol in John is the duality between light and darkness. This contrast appears repeatedly throughout the text. From the introduction, John tells us that Jesus is the light that came into the world, but the darkness did not understand it. This metaphor is not just a reference to good and evil, but a profound spiritual teaching, enlightenment and ignorance. The light represents knowledge, truth, the expansion of consciousness. Darkness symbolizes a lack of understanding, resistance to change, imprisonment in illusion. And this battle does not only occur in the external world, but within each human being. If we analyze it well, we'll see that John constructs his narrative based on these archetypes, using them to guide the reader through a journey of spiritual transformation. His characters are not just historical figures, but symbolic representations of different states of consciousness. Nicodemus, the Samaritan woman, John the Baptist, the disciples, they all embody universal archetypes. Nicodemus, for instance, represents the one who seeks truth, but is still bound by the limitations of the rational mind. He goes to meet Jesus at night, a detail that is not accidental. John is telling us that he is still in the darkness, unable to fully comprehend the light. Another fundamental archetype in the Gospel is that of the initiatory path. The text is structured like a learning journey, where the reader is invited to traverse different stages of understanding. There is an initial call, the presentation of the Logos, followed by trials and challenges, the teachings of Jesus and the miracles, culminating in a great transformation, the resurrection. This pattern is the same as we find in ancient mythologies and even in modern narratives. The hero begins in a state of ignorance, faces obstacles, and in the end, achieves a higher level of understanding. But there's something intriguing about this gospel. Unlike the other three, it seems to have been written for a more initiated audience, for those who were ready to understand deeper teachings. Many scholars point out that John has Gnostic elements, that is, an emphasis on secret knowledge, on inner revelation, on the search for hidden truth. This raises a fascinating question. Was John conveying a message intended only for the few who had eyes to see? This possibility gains even more strength when we analyze the way John presents the teachings of Jesus. He not only reports events, but structures them symbolically. Each miracle has a meaning beyond the physical. When Jesus turns water into wine, it's not just a demonstration of power, but a metaphor for spiritual transmutation. When he heals the man born blind, it's not just a literal miracle, but a symbol of spiritual blindness and enlightenment. This symbolic approach extends to Jesus' famous I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Each of these phrases not only describes a quality, but evokes a deep archetype. The bread represents the spiritual nourishment. The light represents the truth that dispels darkness. The way represents the initiatory journey of the seeker. And then the big question arises: why did John structure his gospel in this way? Could it be that he wanted to preserve a deeper teaching, intended only for those who were prepared to receive it? If we look at history, we will see that many spiritual texts were written in this way, using symbols and archetypes to convey knowledge that could be misinterpreted by the unprepared. The Gospel of John, then, is not just a story about Jesus. It is a spiritual map, a guide to enlightenment, an invitation for the reader to step out of the darkness of ignorance and into the light of true knowledge. But to understand its hidden message, we need to decipher the archetypes it conceals. In the next section, we will explore one of the most powerful and central archetypes of the Gospel, the Logos, the creating word, and how it reveals the essence of existence. From the very first verse of the Gospel of John, we encounter a statement that transcends time and space. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. With this introduction, John transports us to a level of spiritual understanding that goes beyond mere historical narrative. Here, he is not just reporting events, he is offering us a key to unravel a cosmic mystery, the Logos. But what does this concept truly mean? And why is it so crucial in the archetypal structure of the Gospel? The Logos, translated as word or verb, is a fundamental archetype that appears in different spiritual traditions. In Greek philosophy, especially in Heraclitus and the Stoic tradition, the Logos was seen as the divine reason that permeates and organizes the universe. For the Jews, the idea of a creative principle that manifests itself through the Word dates back to Genesis, where God creates the world by simply saying, "Let there be light." John then unites these two streams of thought and presents us with Jesus as the incarnation of this divine principle. He is not just a teacher or prophet, but the very creative Word in human form. Here we find an archetype of absolute transformation. If the Logos is the Word that shapes the world, then Jesus, as the incarnated Logos, is the one who reorganizes reality, breaking the barriers of illusion and leading to truth. This is why John emphasizes that the truth will set us free, because knowing the Logos means awakening to the true nature of existence. This concept is so powerful that it echoes in different mystical traditions. In Hinduism, we find the Om, the primordial sound that sustains the universe. In Buddhism, enlightenment is deeply connected to the understanding of the true nature of reality, which is also expressed through sacred words and mantras. But John does something even more fascinating. He not only declares that the Logos exists, but invites us to perceive how it acts in spiritual transformation. The Logos is not an abstract concept, it is action, change, renewal. And that's why every encounter that Jesus has in the Gospel of John results in a radical change in the other. When he speaks with Nicodemus, he provokes a deep questioning about what it means to be born again. When he talks with the Samaritan woman, he transforms her thirst for water into a thirst for spiritual knowledge. The Logos not only reveals, but deconstructs. It shatters old beliefs, dissolves illusions, and offers a new framework of perception. This becomes evident in Jesus' dialogues, which often confuse his listeners. In John 6, when he says, "I am the bread of life, whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty," many do not understand. They take his words literally, unable to see the symbolic level of the message. And this confusion is not accidental. John is showing us that transformation through the Logos requires a leap of consciousness. It is necessary to go beyond the common mind, beyond literal thinking, to access the spiritual truth that hides behind the words. Another fascinating aspect of the Logos is its relationship with sound and vibration. If we look at the esoteric tradition, we will see that the entire universe is upheld by frequencies and vibrational patterns. This means that the word is not just a set of letters or phonemes, it is a vehicle of creative energy. The ancients knew this, and that's why mantras and sacred names were considered powerful. In the Gospel, John shows us that the Logos is this primordial vibration manifested in human form. This explains why Jesus' speech has such an impact. It is not just communication, but a wave of vibrational transformation that resonates in the soul of those who are ready to receive it. But not everyone can withstand the power of the Logos. In the Gospel itself, we see that many reject Jesus, not because they rationally disagree with him, but because they cannot bear the impact of the truth he brings. When the light of the Logos illuminates the darkness, there are two options: accept the transformation or retreat into illusion. This rejection of the Logos is clearly seen in the reaction of the Pharisees, who see in Jesus a threat, not just politically, but existentially. He not only challenges their doctrines, but unravels the very structure of power and control on which they were founded. The Logos, then, is a revolutionary archetype. It not only teaches, but it deconstructs everything that is false, everything that imprisons, everything that prevents the awakening of consciousness. And this is the essence of John's Gospel, a call to leave behind the old way of seeing the world and enter into a new reality, where truth is not a concept, but a living experience. Interestingly, this archetype of the Logos also connects us to the idea of continuous creation. If the word creates, then we are constantly shaping our reality through what we think and speak. This teaching, which we find both in the Gospel and in spiritual traditions around the world, reminds us that speech has power, that truth sets free, and that consciousness transforms. But there is an even deeper detail in this symbolic construction. When John introduces us to Jesus as the Logos, he is telling us something that few realize. The Logos is not outside of us, it's within. This is the great revelation of the Gospel. Spiritual awakening is not just about accepting an external master, but recognizing the spark of the Logos within oneself. This is the true resurrection, the true rebirth. And here we come to a crucial question. If the Logos is the creative word, then what is the role of light in this process? In the next segment, we will explore the archetype of light and darkness, one of the most powerful in the Gospel of John, and we will see how it invites us to transcend ignorance and enter into true understanding. From the dawn of humanity, the duality between light and darkness has been one of the most powerful and universal archetypes. In all cultures, we find this symbolic opposition representing not only the contrast between day and night, but also the clash between knowledge and ignorance, between awakening and unconsciousness. The Gospel of John elevates this archetype to a spiritual and mystical level, using it to convey a profound truth about the human condition and the purpose of existence. But does this duality hide something beyond what it seems? Is John revealing to us a hidden teaching about the nature of reality? Right at the beginning of the Gospel, John declares, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." This passage contains an essential enigma. The light shines, but the darkness does not understand it. Here, John is not just talking about a physical phenomenon. He is describing to us an internal conflict, a spiritual battle that occurs within each human being. The light symbolizes truth, awakened consciousness, the wisdom that guides the way. The darkness represents the state of ignorance, the imprisonment in the illusions of the material world, the refusal to see beyond what is visible. But there's something even more fascinating. John tells us that the light came into the world, but not everyone accepted it. This idea is reiterated when Jesus talks to Nicodemus and says, "The light has come into the world, but people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil." Here we encounter a shocking revelation. It's not that people simply don't see the light. They actively reject it. Why? Because accepting the light means facing the truth, and the truth can be painful. Let's look at the symbolism of Nicodemus, one of the most intriguing characters in the Gospel. He is a Pharisee, a teacher of the law, someone who should be among the most enlightened. However, when he seeks Jesus for answers, he does so at night. John emphasizes this detail because he wants to tell us something fundamental. Nicodemus is still in the darkness of ignorance. He has intellectual knowledge but lacks spiritual vision. The fact that he needs to go to Jesus in secret shows that true awakening requires the courage to abandon old beliefs and open oneself to a new way of seeing the world. The archetype of light and darkness also appears in the miracle of the healing of the man born blind. Jesus restores sight to a man who has never seen the sunlight, but the real miracle goes beyond the physical. This episode represents the journey of the spiritual seeker. The one who was once blind to the truth can now see it clearly. But the most striking detail is the reaction of the Pharisees. Instead of rejoicing over the miracle, they question, doubt, and even try to discredit the healed man. This scene reflects a profound truth. Many people prefer to remain in the darkness because the light threatens the structure of beliefs and the power they have built upon illusions. John also uses this archetype to reveal something hidden about Jesus' own mission. In several passages he declares, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." This is not a simple invitation to belief, but a transformative statement. What does it mean to follow the light? It means leaving behind the darkness of ego, ignorance, limitation, and accepting the expansion of consciousness, the awakening of the spirit. The light, however, does not impose its presence. It simply offers itself. And this is one of the most powerful messages of the gospel. Spiritual awakening is a choice. Jesus does not force anyone to accept the light. He simply manifests it and waits for those who have eyes to see. But there is a price for this choice. Following the light means letting go of illusions, of false securities, of the comfortable shadows of the mind. Not everyone is ready for that. We can clearly see this dynamic in the episode of Judas Iscariot. When Judas decides to betray Jesus, John inserts a symbolic detail that goes unnoticed by many readers. And after he had taken the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was night. This is not a simple reference to the time. John wants to tell us that Judas chose darkness. He had the opportunity to walk in the light, but he preferred another path. But there is an even deeper mystery. Darkness has a purpose. John does not present darkness as something absolute and immutable. On the contrary, throughout the gospel, we see that light gradually illuminates those who are ready to receive it. Nicodemus' own journey reflects this transformation. At first, he comes at night, still unable to see the light. But at the end of the gospel, after Jesus' crucifixion, he appears bringing myrrh and aloe for the burial, a gesture that indicates he finally understood the truth. This teaches us something fundamental. Awakening is a process, not an instantaneous event. Not everyone can accept the light immediately. Some people need to go through the valley of shadows before they recognize the need for light. Darkness is not just the absence of light, it is also a field of learning. This duality between light and darkness has an interesting parallel with Gnostic thought. In Gnosticism, we find the idea that the material world is a prison of darkness, created to keep souls away from the truth. The Gospel of John resonates with this view by emphasizing that Jesus came as light to free those who are imprisoned in the shadows. But John also tells us something that the Gnostics often overlooked. Darkness is not an absolute enemy. It is part of the journey. And here we arrive at a big question. If light represents truth, then how can we fully receive it? John gives us the answer in the following chapters of his Gospel, through purification and rebirth. But how does this rebirth happen? The answer lies in another powerful archetype, water as a symbol of transformation and spiritual renewal. In the next section, we will explore the archetype of water and rebirth, the baptism, the living water, and the deep connection between physical purification and spiritual enlightenment. Since time immemorial, water has been a universal symbol of purification, renewal, and rebirth. All major spiritual traditions use this element to represent the transition from one state to another, from the old to the new, from death to life, from ignorance to enlightenment. In the Gospel of John, water is not just an essential component of the narrative, but a powerful archetype that appears repeatedly, always marking moments of profound spiritual transformation. But what is the hidden meaning behind these episodes? Could John be revealing a deeper truth about the path of awakening? Right at the beginning of the Gospel, we find John the Baptist, the one who prepares the way for Jesus, baptizing people in the Jordan River. This symbolic act is more than just a simple external ritual. It represents the purification of the self, the death of the old identity, and the birth of a new consciousness. Baptism is a rite of passage, a moment when the individual renounces the past and opens up to a new reality. But there's something else going on here. John the Baptist clearly states that his baptism is only with water, while the one who will come after him will baptize with the Holy Spirit and with fire. This distinction leads us to an intriguing question. If water represents the initial purification, what comes next? This same idea of rebirth through water appears in the famous encounter between Jesus and Nicodemus. When Nicodemus, a teacher of the law, seeks out Jesus in secret, he is trying to understand the mystery of the kingdom of God. But Jesus responds with an enigmatic phrase, "Truly, truly I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit." Here, John gives us a crucial clue about the spiritual transformation process. Being born of water is not just a symbolic act, but an archetype of inner rebirth. It means dissolving the old identity, cleansing oneself of illusions, and making room for something new. But there's an even deeper detail. Jesus doesn't just mention water, he also speaks of the Spirit. This indicates to us that rebirth occurs on two levels. The first, represented by water, is the initial purification, the preparation. The second, represented by the Spirit, is the true enlightenment, the rise of consciousness. We can see this same archetype in another significant episode, the encounter of Jesus with the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. Here we have another powerful symbol, thirst. The woman goes to the well in search of ordinary water, but Jesus offers something much greater, the living water. He says, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. For the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." This scene encapsulates the difference between the two types of water: common water, which only quenches temporarily, and living water, which represents the spiritual knowledge that leads to true life. Once again, John is teaching us that true transformation does not occur just at the physical or emotional level. It happens at the level of consciousness. But water doesn't just appear in these symbolic dialogues. It's also present in Jesus' miracles. One of the most enigmatic is the transformation of water into wine at the wedding of Cana. At first glance, this miracle might seem like just a gesture of generosity, but John shows us that there's something deeper going on. He highlights that Jesus transforms water used for purification into wine. What does this mean? If we look at the symbolism, we will see that water represents the initial phase of awakening, the necessary purification before the true transformation. But wine symbolizes something beyond, the fullness of life, the transmutation of the ordinary state into something divine. This is a powerful teaching. Water prepares us, but wine completes us. The spiritual path is not just about purification, but about elevation, about transcending the limits of matter and accessing a higher reality. Another episode that reinforces this archetype is the healing at the pool of Bethesda. Here we see a man who has been paralyzed for 38 years, waiting for the waters of the pool to be stirred so that he can enter and be healed. But when Jesus arrives, he no longer needs the physical water. Jesus heals him with just his word. This subtle detail reveals something fascinating. The water, although essential, is not the ultimate goal. It is a means to something greater. The true healing, the true transformation, comes from the recognition of truth. And then we have the washing of the disciples' feet. This episode, which takes place at the Last Supper, is one of the most symbolically charged. Jesus, the Master, kneels to wash the disciples' feet. Peter, shocked, initially refuses to let Jesus wash him, but Jesus responds, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." This scene encapsulates the final teaching about water and rebirth. Here, water represents the humility necessary for true spiritual growth. It's not enough to just seek knowledge or enlightenment. One must let go of pride, be willing to be purified, to abandon the ego. This is the last stage of the rebirth process. John teaches us, therefore, that water is a powerful symbol of the spiritual path. First, it purifies us. Then it transforms into the living water, which connects us with the divine essence. And finally, it becomes a gesture of service and humility, showing that true awakening is not just about oneself, but about the impact we can have on the world. But there is a crucial question that arises from this analysis. If water symbolizes nourishment and spiritual renewal, what can be said about the food for the soul? After all, the spiritual journey is not just about what we drink, but also about what we consume and absorb internally. And that's exactly what John reveals to us in the next archetype, the bread of life. The idea that we do not live on material bread alone, but on something much deeper and essential to our being. In the next section, we will explore the archetype of the bread of life, the spiritual nourishment that sustains those who seek the truth. Since ancient times, bread has been one of the most fundamental symbols of human existence. It represents sustenance, nourishment, and the basis of survival. But in the Gospel of John, this common daily element is elevated to a much deeper meaning. It becomes a symbol of spiritual nourishment, of what truly sustains the soul. But what does this symbolic transformation really mean? Is John telling us something hidden about the true food of consciousness? To understand the archetype of the bread of life, we need to examine one of the most impactful moments in the Gospel, the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. This miracle is much more than a demonstration of power. It's a teaching about spiritual abundance and the true satiation of the soul. John shows us that the crowd following Jesus is hungry, but not just in the physical sense. They seek something deeper, something that can fill the inner void that no material food can satisfy. And it is in this context that Jesus performs the miracle, not just distributing bread, but using it as a symbol of spiritual transformation. After this event, Jesus makes one of the most enigmatic statements in the Gospel. "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst." Here, he is telling us that the hunger that truly matters is not that of the body, but that of the soul. Humanity, lost in the distractions of the material world, incessantly seeks something that can fill the existential void. But what Jesus reveals is that this void cannot be filled by external things. Only the connection with the divine can truly nourish the spirit. This statement by Jesus generates great controversy among those who hear it. Many cannot grasp the profound meaning of his words. They ask, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" Here, John shows us once again how spiritual truth is often misunderstood by those who are trapped in a limited view of reality. They interpret Jesus' words literally, unable to perceive the hidden message behind the symbolism. And it is precisely at this point that Jesus delves even deeper into his explanation. "Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life." These words are one of the greatest mysteries of the gospel. They do not refer to a physical act, but to something much deeper: the incorporation of spiritual truth, the internalization of the divine essence. Here, John introduces us to a concept similar to that of the mystical traditions of the East. In Hinduism and Buddhism, we find the idea that spiritual nourishment is wisdom, and whoever absorbs it becomes one with the truth. In other words, what we consume internally defines who we are, not just in the sense of food, but in the sense of what we choose to accept in our mind and in our soul. This leads us to an essential question. What are we feeding our consciousness with? Are we nourishing ourselves with spiritual truths or with illusions and distractions of the world? What do we seek to satisfy our inner hunger? The connection between the bread of life and the supper cannot be ignored. John is the only evangelist who does not directly describe the institution of the Last Supper, but this does not mean that he ignores its significance. On the contrary, he develops this archetype in an even deeper way, showing that true communion with the divine is not just an external ritual, but an internal and transformative experience. When Jesus talks about the bread that came down from heaven, he is connecting us with another fundamental story from the Jewish tradition: the manna in the wilderness. In Exodus, God feeds the Israelites with manna, a mysterious bread that fell from the sky and sustained the people throughout their journey. But this bread had a peculiar trait: it could not be stored. Each day, people needed to trust that they would receive enough for that moment. This idea has a profound spiritual parallel. The nourishment of the soul must be sought daily, at every moment. We cannot depend on past experiences or old revelations. The awakening is continuous. John also shows us that not everyone is ready to receive this nourishment. At the end of the speech about the bread of life, many of Jesus' disciples turn away. They say, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" This reveals an essential truth. Not everyone is prepared for spiritual transformation. There are those who prefer to continue feeding on illusions, for truth requires change, and change can be painful. This episode reflects a universal pattern. When faced with the choice between truth and the comfort of illusion, many choose the illusion. But for those who stay, for those who accept the challenge of nourishing themselves with spiritual knowledge, there's a promise. He who eats of this bread will live forever. The archetype of the bread of life, therefore, teaches us that true sustenance is not found in the physical, but in the eternal. It challenges us to look inward and ask, what are we nourishing our consciousness with? Are we feeding on wisdom and truth or on distractions and illusions? But there is a crucial detail in this spiritual journey. If bread represents the sustenance of the soul, there is another equally powerful archetype that John develops: the shepherd and the wolf, the one who guides the sheep to the light and the one who tries to lead them astray. In the next section, we will explore the archetype of the shepherd and the wolf, the conflict between truth and illusion, and discover how John reveals to us a hidden teaching about the struggle between the true spiritual guides and those who lead to deception. Throughout history, the image of the shepherd has been used as a symbol of leadership, protection, and spiritual guidance. He is the one who guides, who takes care of, and who leads his flock to a safe path. However, in the Gospel of John, this figure takes on a much deeper meaning. Here, Jesus presents himself as the Good Shepherd, the one who knows his sheep and is known by them. But there is a hidden danger, the wolf, the one who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. What is John revealing to us with this metaphor? Is it just a simple way to illustrate good and evil, or is there a more hidden message which speaks directly about the spiritual struggle between truth and illusion? In chapter 10 of his Gospel, John presents us with one of the passages richest in symbolism. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep, but the hireling, who is not the shepherd, and whose own the sheep are not, sees the wolf coming and flees. Here there are three essential figures. The good shepherd, the one who sacrifices, who leads with love, and who truly cares about the fate of the sheep. The mercenary, the one who appears to be a shepherd, but in truth does not care about the sheep and flees in the face of danger. The wolf, the one who sneaks in to scatter and destroy the flock. These three archetypes are not just a moral illustration. They represent three spiritual forces at work in the world. The good shepherd is the one who leads to the path of truth, who guides souls towards enlightenment. He not only teaches, but lives the teaching. He is willing to sacrifice himself for those he leads, because his connection with the sheep is not based on interest, but on love and commitment. The mercenary, on the other hand, represents the false spiritual leaders. He may appear to be a guide, may speak beautiful words and have the appearance of a shepherd, but when the moment of truth comes, he abandons the flock. John is warning us against those who use spirituality as a means to gain power, status, or wealth, but who do not have a true commitment to the truth. And then we have the wolf. Unlike the mercenary, who only flees, the wolf is an active force of destruction. It comes to scatter the sheep, to create confusion, to sow fear. This archetype appears in many spiritual traditions as the embodiment of deceit, manipulation, and the force that hinders spiritual evolution. In the context of the Gospel, the wolf represents those who turn people away from the truth, who distort teachings, and who create barriers to prevent the light from shining. But John goes further. He not only introduces us to these three archetypes, but also gives us a hidden key to discern between them. In John 10:27, Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." This is a fundamental detail. What differentiates the true from the false? The voice. The sheep know the shepherd because they recognize his voice. This is not a literal matter. John is telling us that true spiritual teaching has a vibration, a resonance that the soul immediately recognizes. The truth does not need to be imposed. When someone hears it, they feel its authenticity. But there's a problem. Many sheep get lost because they listen to voices that aren't those of the true shepherd. The world is full of false truths, distorted doctrines, and paths that seem right but lead to illusion. The mercenary and the wolf don't come saying, "I am a deceiver." They come disguised as light, promising safety, comfort, and absolute certainties. John warns us about this right at the beginning of the Gospel when he says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." Just like in the archetype of light and darkness, not everyone is ready to recognize the truth when it manifests itself. Another crucial point is that John emphasizes the personal relationship between the shepherd and the sheep. Jesus does not speak of a system, a religion, or a dogma. He speaks of a direct and living connection. This is a deeply mystical teaching. True spiritual knowledge is not something external, but a direct experience between the soul and the truth. This leads us to a fundamental question. How do we know if we are hearing the voice of the Good Shepherd or being deceived by the mercenary and the wolf? John gives us an answer in one of the most well-known verses of the Gospel. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Here he is not simply making a theological statement, but revealing a profound spiritual principle. The path to truth is not something fixed, dogmatic, or institutional. It is a living experience. But this journey requires something: vigilance and discernment. Jesus himself warns us, "Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves." This means that the true spiritual quest cannot be passive. It requires an awakening of consciousness to recognize the signs of truth and the deceptions of illusion. John shows us, therefore, that the spiritual journey is an invisible battlefield. At every moment, we are surrounded by the shepherd's call and the whisper of the wolf. The path of light is always present, but shadows try to divert us. Spiritual awakening is, above all, a choice. But there's a crucial detail that still needs to be explored. If the Good Shepherd guides souls towards the truth, then what is the final destination of this journey? If we follow his voice, where does he lead us? The answer lies in the next archetype that John presents to us: the way, the truth, and the life. The spiritual journey of the disciple. In the next section, we will explore the so-called call to awakening, the transformation process, and the final revelation about the true life. Since the most ancient times, humanity has been seeking answers to the great questions of existence. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Philosophers, mystics, and spiritual seekers of all ages have tried to unravel the mystery of life. In the Gospel of John, Jesus offers us an enigmatic but deeply revealing answer: "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." This statement, loaded with meaning, is much more than a simple religious declaration. It contains within it a universal archetype, that of the spiritual journey, one that guides the seeker from a state of ignorance to enlightenment. But what exactly is John trying to reveal to us with this phrase? Could he be describing an internal process of transformation? To understand this archetype, we need to analyze its three parts: the way, the truth, and the life. Each of them represents a stage of the spiritual journey. They are not separate concepts, but rather a continuous flow of consciousness evolution. The path, the seeker's crossing. Every journey begins with a call. In the Gospel, we see this clearly when Jesus invites his disciples with a simple phrase, but loaded with symbolism: "Follow me." This call is not just physical, it's a call to awaken, to abandon the old way of life and embark on a journey of transformation. In mythology, this archetype appears in various forms. In Joseph Campbell's monomyth, for example, it is known as the call to adventure. The hero, trapped in their ordinary reality, receives an invitation to explore an unknown world. But this call always comes with a challenge, because following the path requires abandoning what is familiar. In the Gospel, this dynamic becomes evident in the story of the rich young man. He approaches Jesus, seeking answers, but when he is challenged to give up his possessions to follow the spiritual path, he retreats. This episode reveals an important principle. Following the path requires detachment. It requires letting go of illusions and the ties of the material world. Here, John shows us that the path is not just an external journey, but an internal crossing. And this journey is not easy. Jesus warns us, "Narrow is the gate, and tight is the path that leads to life, and few are those who find it." This metaphor indicates that true awakening does not occur automatically. It requires effort, dedication, and internal transformation. But for those who choose to follow the path, there is a promise: the truth will be revealed. The truth, the knowledge that liberates. If the path is the process of seeking, the truth is what the seeker finds along this journey. But what does this truth really mean? Jesus declares, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." This is one of the most powerful phrases in the Gospel, as it indicates that ignorance is a form of imprisonment. But this imprisonment is not physical, it's mental, emotional, and spiritual. It is built by false beliefs, illusions, and a limited sense of identity. In the Gospel, we find several characters who represent this struggle for truth. Nicodemus seeks to understand, but he is still bound by his old conceptions. The Samaritan woman begins to see the truth, but she needs to abandon her limited view of spirituality. Pilate, at the time of Jesus' judgment, asks the essential question, "What is truth?" Zrania, but he does not wait for the answer. This reveals a crucial point. Not everyone who asks is ready to hear the answer. John shows us that the truth cannot be imposed. It needs to be discovered. It is not a doctrine or a set of external rules, but an experience of inner enlightenment. That's why Jesus speaks in parables and symbols. He is not just informing, but guiding each person to discover the truth within themselves. But there is an important detail. The truth is often uncomfortable. In the Gospel, we see that those who accept the truth are transformed, but those who reject it feel threatened. The Pharisees, the religious leaders of the time, see in Jesus a danger because he challenges the power structures, rigid beliefs, and established dogmas. This leads us to a fundamental question. If the truth sets you free, why do so many reject it? The answer lies in the resistance to change. The ego clings to what is familiar, even if it is an illusion. But for those who accept the truth, there is a promise. They will find life. Life. Spiritual enlightenment. The seeker's journey begins on the path, goes through the truth, and culminates in the true life. But this life that John speaks of is not just physical existence. It is a state of expanded consciousness, a direct connection with the divine essence. Jesus declares, "I have come so that they may have life and have it abundantly." This abundant life does not mean material wealth or earthly comfort. It means a full, enlightened existence, free from the limitations of fear and illusion. Here we encounter one of the deepest mysteries of the Gospel, the resurrection. In several passages, Jesus talks about death and rebirth as a necessary process to attain true life. This does not refer only to physical death, but to the death of the ego, of false identities, of the ties that prevent awakening. This concept is similar to what we find in the mystical traditions of the East. In Hinduism and Buddhism, enlightenment is described as a state where the individual transcends the limited self and unites with the whole. In Gnosticism, true life lies in freeing oneself from the world of illusions and returning to the divine light. John teaches us that this life is available to everyone, but only those who walk the path and accept the truth can reach it. It's not about a promise for the future, but a transformation that can happen here and now. The spiritual journey in the structure of the Gospel. If we look closely, we will see that the Gospel of John itself follows this archetype of the spiritual journey. The calling. In the beginning, Jesus invites the disciples to follow him. The quest for truth. Throughout the Gospel, different characters struggle to understand his teachings. Enlightenment and transformation. Those who accept the truth are deeply transformed. The climax. Death and rebirth. The crucifixion and resurrection represent the final transition, where true life is revealed. This pattern shows us that John did not just write an account about Jesus. He built a spiritual guide, a map for those seeking enlightenment. But there is one final mystery that still needs to be explored. If the journey leads to true life, what happens after resurrection? What is the final great secret that John wants to reveal to us? The answer is in the next archetype. The resurrection and life, the archetype of death and rebirth. Since the dawn of humanity, death and rebirth have been one of the deepest and most universal archetypes. In all major spiritual traditions, we find myths and rituals that symbolize the end of an old identity and the emergence of something new. In the Gospel of John, this archetype reaches its peak in the resurrection of Jesus, an event that is not just a miracle, but a hidden teaching about the path of spiritual transformation. But what does resurrection truly mean? Could John be revealing something beyond the literal narrative? Could this event be a key to understanding the true nature of existence and enlightenment? Death as spiritual transition. To understand resurrection, we first need to comprehend death. In the Gospel, Jesus often talks about death as something necessary for true life to manifest itself. In John 12:24, he says, "If the grain of wheat falling to the ground does not die, it remains alone, but if it dies, it yields much fruit." Here, he is teaching us that death is not an end, but a transition. Just as a seed needs to die to give birth to a new plant, the old identity must be left behind so that the true essence can emerge. This connects us directly to the concept of ego death, present in various spiritual traditions. In Buddhism, for example, enlightenment occurs when the individual transcends the illusion of the separate self and awakens to their true nature. In Hinduism, the path to liberation involves the dissolution of the limited identity and union with the divine. What John shows us then is that resurrection is not just an external event. It represents an internal process that we all must go through. Lazarus and the first sign of resurrection. Before Jesus' own resurrection, John introduces us to a pivotal event, the resurrection of Lazarus. This episode is not just a miracle, it is a harbinger, a hidden teaching about the process of spiritual rebirth. When Jesus arrives at Lazarus' tomb, he encounters Martha, the sister of the deceased, and declares, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if they are dead, will live." This statement is one of the greatest mysteries of the gospel. Here, Jesus is not merely talking about reviving physical bodies. He is telling us that true life is beyond material existence. He teaches us that those who understand this truth never actually die, as their consciousness transcends time and space. Another significant symbolic detail is the way Lazarus is called back to life. Jesus commands, "Lazarus, come out." And then something curious happens. Lazarus emerges from the tomb still wrapped in bandages. This shows us that although he has been resurrected, he still carries with him the traces of death. Here, John gives us a profound teaching. Rebirth does not happen instantly, it is a process. The bandages represent the ties of the past, that which still binds us to old ways of being. What happens to Lazarus after that? The gospel does not tell us, and that is intentional. John is showing us that what matters is not the physical resurrection, but the inner transformation that occurs from it. The resurrection of Jesus and the mystery of transformation. While Lazarus' resurrection was a return to ordinary life, Jesus' resurrection is something completely different. When he resurrects, he doesn't just come back as a living man. He returns transformed, transcending the limitations of matter. He appears to his disciples by passing through walls, appearing and disappearing, showing that his existence now operates on a level beyond the physical. This difference is essential. John is telling us that the true resurrection is not simply returning to the old life, it is becoming something entirely new. But there is an even more mysterious detail. No one recognizes Jesus immediately after the resurrection. Mary Magdalene confuses him with a gardener. The disciples on the way to Emmaus converse with him without realizing who he is. Only when he speaks and breaks the bread do they recognize his presence. This detail cannot be ignored. It indicates that the resurrection transforms not only the form, but the essence of existence. Those who are still bound to the limited vision of the world cannot see the truth before their eyes. This teaches us that spiritual awakening requires a new perspective, a new perception of reality. The hidden meaning of the resurrection. If we delve deeply, we will see that John is not just reporting a supernatural event, he is inviting us to experience the resurrection within ourselves. But how does this happen? The answer lies in the very structure of the gospel itself. First, there is the so-called the way. We are invited to follow a new path of understanding. Then, there is the search for truth, the truth. We go through the process of learning and deconstructing illusions. Finally, there is the final transformation, the life. The ego dies, and the true essence awakens. This is the cycle of death and spiritual rebirth. It doesn't happen just once, it repeats continuously as we advance on the path to enlightenment. John teaches us that resurrection is not a distant event. It is a state of consciousness accessible to all who are willing to die to the old and be reborn to the new. The last teaching, the wine, the vine, and the final mystery of the gospel. But there is a crucial detail that John reserves for the end of his gospel, something that reveals to us the final secret of spiritual transformation. Before his death, Jesus gives one last lesson to his disciples. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who remains in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit. Here we find the last archetype of the gospel, the wine, the vine, and the fusion with divine consciousness. If the resurrection represents the final transformation, then what comes next? What does bearing fruit mean? The answer lies in John's last hidden teaching, the state of unity with the source. In the next section, we will explore the wine, the vine, and the last mystery of the Gospel of John, where we will see how John leads us to the deepest secret of the spiritual journey, the fusion between the human and the divine. After journeying the path, seeking the truth, and understanding the resurrection as an archetype of transformation, we arrive at the last great teaching of the Gospel of John, a teaching that speaks not only of following a master or achieving enlightenment, but about the fusion between the human and the divine. This teaching is revealed in a deeply symbolic and enigmatic metaphor. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. John 15:5. Here, John introduces us to the final stage of the spiritual journey, not just knowing the truth or experiencing transformation, but living in full communion with the source of existence. But what does this metaphor really mean? What does it hide behind its simplicity? The vine as an archetype of divine connection. The vine has always been a sacred symbol in various spiritual traditions. In Jewish culture, the vine was often used as a metaphor for the people of Israel, representing the relationship between God and those who followed his teachings. In the Greco-Roman world, wine was associated with Dionysus, the god of transcendence and spiritual ecstasy. When Jesus identifies himself as the vine, he is revealing a deeper teaching. True life is not an isolated existence, it is a continuous connection with the divine. Just as the branches of the vine cannot exist separated from the trunk, human consciousness cannot fully flourish if it is disconnected from the source. This concept reminds us of the traditions of Eastern mysticism, such as in Vedanta and Buddhism, where enlightenment is not seen as an event, but as a state of unity with the whole. John shows us that the pinnacle of the spiritual journey is not just knowledge, but the fusion with the divine. But there's an even more fascinating detail. John not only mentions the vine, but also the fruit and the wine. Wine as the archetype of transformation and spiritual joy. Wine appears at crucial moments in the Gospel of John, always laden with symbolism. At the beginning, we find the miracle of water turning into wine, where Jesus takes something ordinary and elevates it to a new level. This event is not just a demonstration of power, it represents spiritual transmutation, the transformation of ordinary consciousness into something divine. Next, we have the Last Supper, where the wine becomes the symbol of Christ's blood. This scene is not just a ritual, but a hidden message about the final stage of the spiritual journey. Those who drink of this wine partake in the divine essence itself. And finally, we have the moment when Jesus on the cross says, "I thirst." And what is offered to him? Vinegar, a spoiled wine. Here, John gives us a final hidden teaching. The world offers a distorted version of the truth, while the true life can only be found in connection with the divine. But what is the ultimate purpose of this archetype? What does bear fruit mean? The last mystery, the fruit of the vine and the mission of the awakened consciousness. If Jesus is the vine and we are the branches, then the fruit represents what we generate from this connection. This fruit is not something physical. It is the transformed state of consciousness, the impact that an awakened being has on the world. Here, John reveals to us the last mystery of the gospel. The spiritual journey does not end with enlightenment. It expands to transform the world around us. This echoes a principle found in various esoteric traditions. In Hinduism, the yogi who achieves enlightenment does not abandon the world. He returns to help others awaken. In Mahayana Buddhism, the bodhisattva, upon reaching enlightenment, decides to remain in the cycle of rebirths to guide other souls to liberation. In Gnosticism, true knowledge is not just individual. It must be shared to break the chains of ignorance. John teaches us that true spirituality is not isolationist. It is expansive, contagious, fruitful. The awakening of an individual bears fruits that nourish others. The knowledge that liberates one being becomes the key to liberating many others. This is the final mystery of the gospel. Enlightenment is not the end. It is the beginning of a new mission. Conclusion: the hidden message of the Gospel of John. Now that we have traversed the entire symbolic structure of the gospel, we can see that John did not merely write an account about Jesus, he wrote a map for the spiritual journey. Each archetype we analyze reveals a stage of this journey: the Logos, the call to truth; the light and the darkness, the conflict of consciousness; the water and the rebirth, spiritual purification; the bread of life, the nourishment of the soul; the good shepherd and the wolf, the choice between truth and illusion; the way, the truth and the life, the seeker's crossing; the resurrection, the final transformation process; the vine and the wine, the union with the divine and the fruition of consciousness. We see then that John is not just narrating events, but conveying a hidden message to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. This message invites us to transcend literal understanding and access the deeper meaning of the gospel. It shows us that true enlightenment is not found in following rigid dogmas, but in undergoing an internal process of rebirth and merging with divine consciousness. And this is the great secret of the Gospel of John. The kingdom of God is not a distant place. It is within us. The spiritual journey is not something that will happen in the future. It is happening now. The call has been made. The truth has been revealed. The transformation is possible. The only question that remains is, are we ready to follow the path? Mind Unfettered, now that we have unraveled the hidden archetypes in the Gospel of John, I want to know your opinion. Which of these secret messages resonated with you the most? Have you ever had a moment in your spiritual journey where you felt a profound truth was revealed to you? Share your experience in the comments. Believe, your voice matters. When you comment, something powerful happens. You express your connection to this truth and, at the same time, inspire other awakened minds that are seeking the same knowledge. The collective manifestation is real, and each comment creates a vibration of awakening that echoes far beyond this screen. And now, if you truly wish to go further, the next video popping up on your screen tackles one of the most forbidden topics in history: the forbidden secret of the Vatican, hidden truth about Jesus. Is there something that has been hidden from the world for centuries? Click now to continue your journey and unravel this hidden secret.